They forced me to sell Grandpa's worthless land, then discovered what I built underground. The wind howled through the skeletal trees that lined the edges of my grandfather's land, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. It wasn't just the cold air, it was the weight of memories and promises broken under pressure. I stood there on what used to be his porch, now crumbling beneath years of neglect, staring at the barren fields stretching out before me. The soil was dry, cracked like old leather, but every inch of this place held pieces of him. Laughter echoing from summer evenings spent chasing fireflies, whispered stories about the stars while lying in the tall grass, and quiet moments when he'd sit by the creek teaching me how to skip stones across its surface. Grandpa always said this land had secrets buried deep within it, secrets no one else could see. He called it worthless, only because others couldn't understand its value. To him it wasn't about money or profit, it was about roots, history, and dreams waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. But after he passed away, those who never understood began circling like vultures. They came armed with legal papers, appraisals declaring the property unfit for anything worthwhile, and voices dripping with pity as they told me selling was my best option. I fought back tears as their words replayed in my mind. "You can't keep holding on to something so useless," they'd say, shaking their heads as if they knew better than I did. Useless? This patch of earth where I learned resilience, kindness, and strength? Where Grandpa taught me to dream bigger than anyone thought possible. No, it wasn't useless, not to me. Yet here I was, standing alone, forced into a corner by people who didn't care about the legacy etched into every blade of grass. What they didn't know, and what I hadn't dared tell anyone, was that I hadn't been idle during all these years. While they dismissed this place as worthless, I had been working tirelessly underground, crafting something extraordinary. Something Grandpa would have been proud of. Every night, long after the sun dipped below the horizon, I worked silently, fueled by determination and love. My hands were calloused, my body ached, but none of that mattered. What mattered was proving them wrong, not just to spite them, but to honor everything Grandpa believed in. Now, as I looked out over the desolate landscape, I felt both fear and defiance bubbling inside me. Fear because I knew once they took control, there would be no turning back. Defiance because I refused to let them win, not without seeing what I had created first. And so, with trembling fingers gripping the rusted railing of the porch, I made a silent vow: whatever happened next, I wouldn't go down without showing them exactly why this land wasn't worthless at all. The day they arrived felt like Judgment Day. Their cars kicked up clouds of dust as they pulled onto the dirt driveway, engines roaring like beasts eager to devour what little remained of my sanctuary. Lawyers, developers, even distant relatives I barely recognized, they poured out of their vehicles like an invading army, armed with clipboards, contracts, and smug expressions. Each step they took toward the house felt heavier than the last, crushing not just the brittle ground beneath their feet, but also any hope I had left of keeping this place intact. One man stepped forward, his suit immaculate despite the grime swirling around him. His name was Mr. Hargrove, a real estate developer whose reputation preceded him. People whispered about how he turned failing properties into gold mines, though few mentioned the lives he trampled along the way. He adjusted his tie as he approached, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Harper," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "we're glad you've finally come to terms with reality. Selling this land will give you a fresh start, a chance to move on." His words stung more than I expected. Fresh start? Move on? Did he think I wanted to forget everything tied to this place? That I could simply walk away from decades of memories and hard work without looking back? I clenched my fists tightly, nails digging into my palms, forcing myself to stay composed. Losing my temper wouldn't help now. Instead, I nodded stiffly, letting him believe he'd won. Letting them all believe they'd won. As they spread out across the property, inspecting every detail with clinical precision, I followed quietly, watching their reactions. Some poked at the dry soil with sticks, shaking their heads in disapproval. Others wandered aimlessly, snapping photos of the dilapidated barn and leaning fence posts. None of them paid attention to me anymore. I was invisible, insignificant compared to the prize they coveted. But I noticed them. I saw the way their lips curled into sneers when they spoke about the eyesore of a house, how their voices carried an undertone of greed whenever they discussed potential profits. They weren't here for progress or improvement. They were here to exploit, to take what they deemed valuable and discard the rest. And then came the moment I dreaded most. Mr. Hargrove handed me the final paperwork, his pen poised expectantly. "Just sign here," he instructed, tapping the dotted line with unnecessary emphasis. My hand hovered above the document, trembling slightly. For a fleeting second, I considered refusing, tearing the paper apart and daring them to try taking this land by force. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already played their cards perfectly, leaving me with no choice but to comply. With a deep breath, I scrawled my name across the page, each stroke feeling like another nail in my coffin. "Congratulations," Mr. Hargrove said, reclaiming the signed contract with a satisfied grin. "You've made the right decision." Right decision? The irony burned like acid in my throat. If only he knew what lay hidden beneath his polished shoes, what treasures they were blindly walking over. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, I retreated to the edge of the property, leaning against the weathered oak tree Grandpa used to call his favorite spot. Its branches swayed gently, almost as if comforting me, whispering reminders of the battles we'd fought together. But comfort wasn't enough anymore. Anger surged within me, hot and unrelenting, fueling a fire I hadn't realized still burned. How dare they dismiss this place so easily? How dare they reduce it to numbers on a spreadsheet, ignoring the blood, sweat, and tears poured into every inch of it? I wanted to scream, to demand they look closer, to show them the truth hiding just out of sight. But instead, I swallowed my rage, letting it simmer beneath the surface. Because soon, very soon, they would see. They would regret ever calling this land worthless. Night fell quickly, cloaking the land in shadows thick enough to swallow sound whole. The moon hung low, casting pale light over the fields, illuminating the faint outline of tire tracks left behind by the invaders' cars. I lingered outside longer than I should have, unable to bring myself indoors just yet. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, familiar scents that tugged at memories I wasn't ready to confront. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly, its cry echoing like a mournful lament. It matched the heaviness settling in my chest. Finally, I turned and walked toward the old shed tucked behind the house. Its wooden walls groaned under the weight of time, paint peeling away in ragged strips. To anyone else, it might have looked abandoned, forgotten, a relic of days gone by. But to me, it was the gateway to something far greater. I unlocked the padlock with steady hands, sliding the creaky door open just wide enough to slip inside. The space was cramped, filled with tools and scraps collected over the years, but my focus was on the trapdoor embedded in the floor. A single lantern hung from a hook above it, casting flickering light over the worn handle. I knelt down, gripping the metal ring and pulling upward with practiced ease. The door opened smoothly, revealing a set of steep stairs descending into darkness. The air wafting up was cool and damp, carrying traces of clay and stone. My heart quickened as I descended, each step bringing me closer to the world I'd built in secret. At the bottom, I flipped a switch, and rows of dim bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the sprawling network of tunnels and chambers carved meticulously into the earth. This was my sanctuary, my rebellion against those who sought to erase everything meaningful. Years ago, when despair threatened to consume me after Grandpa's passing, I found solace in digging. At first, it was just a small hole beneath the shed, a place to escape the noise of grief. But as weeks turned into months, the project grew. I expanded outward, creating passageways that twisted and turned like veins beneath the surface. Each chamber served a purpose. Some stored supplies, others housed equipment, and a few were reserved for experiments I couldn't conduct above ground. At the heart of it all lay the masterpiece, the culmination of countless sleepless nights and endless determination. It was a greenhouse unlike any other, nestled deep within the earth where sunlight couldn't penetrate. Rows upon rows of hydroponic systems stretched out before me, vibrant green leaves reaching toward artificial lights suspended from the ceiling. Tomatoes ripened on vines, herbs perfumed the air, and exotic plants native to distant lands thrived in carefully controlled environments. It was beautiful, alive, thriving, a stark contrast to the barren wasteland above. Every plant here had a story. There were seeds saved from Grandpa's garden, nurtured until they blossomed anew. Cuttings taken from rare species discovered during travels, preserved with painstaking care. Even wildflowers plucked from roadside ditches, given new life in this subterranean haven. Together, they formed a tapestry of resilience, proof that beauty could flourish even in the darkest places. But the greenhouse wasn't the only marvel hidden underground. Beyond it lay workshops filled with machinery salvaged from junkyards and repurposed for my needs. Welding torches sat alongside 3D printers, tools scattered across workbenches cluttered with half-finished projects. In one corner, A prototype water filtration system hummed softly, designed to harness moisture from the surrounding soil. Nearby, shelves groaned under the weight of journals documenting every experiment, failure, and breakthrough. These rooms represented not just ingenuity but defiance, a refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. As I moved through the labyrinth, running my fingers along rough-hewn walls and pausing to check readings on various devices, pride swelled within me. This place wasn't just a refuge, it was a testament to what could be achieved when passion met perseverance. Every tunnel dug, every seed planted, every invention crafted, it all stemmed from a desire to prove that worth wasn't measured in dollars or acres but in effort, creativity, and love. Yet, as much as this underground world brought me joy, it also reminded me of what I stood to lose. Tomorrow, strangers would descend upon this land, oblivious to the wonders lurking beneath their feet. Would they destroy it all in pursuit of profit? Or would fate intervene, giving me one last chance to reveal the truth? Either way, I knew I couldn't remain passive any longer. The time had come to fight, not just for this land but for the legacy Grandpa entrusted to me. Morning broke too soon, dragging me from restless dreams into the harsh reality awaiting outside. The sky was streaked with hues of orange and pink, painting the horizon in colors that felt cruelly optimistic given the storm brewing inside me. I dressed quickly, choosing practicality over vanity, sturdy boots, jeans patched to the knees, and a flannel shirt layered against the biting autumn chill. Today wasn't about appearances, it was about survival. About making sure the world understood the magnitude of what they were dismissing. By the time I emerged from the house, the first wave of workers had already arrived. Trucks rumbled down the driveway, kicking up clouds of dust that obscured their faces momentarily. Bulldozers idled nearby, their engines growling ominously, ready to tear apart the fragile ecosystem above ground. Men and women in hard hats milled about, consulting blueprints and shouting orders, their movements efficient yet impersonal. They treated the land like an obstacle to overcome rather than a living entity deserving respect. Watching them, I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it nearly overwhelmed me. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping forward before I lost my nerve. Heads turned in my direction, curiosity mingling with irritation on their faces. One of the foremen approached, clipboard in hand, his expression wary. "Yes?" he asked, tone clipped. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," I said firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. He hesitated, likely weighing whether indulging me would waste valuable time, but eventually nodded and gestured for me to follow him. We wove through the chaos until we reached a makeshift command center, a folding table surrounded by chairs, maps spread across its surface. Standing beside it was Mr. Hargrove himself, sipping coffee from a thermos and surveying the scene with evident satisfaction. "Miss Harper," he greeted, raising an eyebrow. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "This isn't just empty land," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor threatening to betray me. "There's something here you need to see, something important." He chuckled, setting the thermos aside. "Important? Miss Harper, we've done our due diligence. Trust me, there's nothing here worth preserving." "You're wrong," I shot back, anger sharpening my words. "If you'll just come with me, I'll show you." For a moment he studied me, perhaps sensing the desperation underlying my plea. Finally, he sighed and motioned for two of his associates to accompany us. "Fine," he relented. "But make it quick." We headed toward the shed, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every step felt monumental, as if the weight of the entire operation rested solely on my shoulders. When we reached the trapdoor, I hesitated, glancing at the group behind me. Their skepticism was palpable, written plainly in furrowed brows and crossed arms. Still, I pushed forward, unlocking the padlock and descending into the depths below. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed through the narrow staircase as they caught sight of the glowing bulbs overhead. By the time we reached the greenhouse, their initial disbelief had morphed into stunned silence. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, all pretense of professionalism abandoned as they took in the lush expanse of greenery, thriving in such an unlikely environment. Mr. Hargrove, however, remained unmoved, his features schooled into an unreadable mask. "What is this?" he demanded, gesturing vaguely at the rows of plants. "It's proof," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Proof that this land isn't worthless. Proof that innovation and sustainability can coexist. Proof that sometimes, the most valuable things are hidden where no one thinks to look." His jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. But then he shook his head, turning away. Impressive, Miss Harper. Truly. But impressive doesn't pay bills. We have investors expecting results, deadlines to meet. This changes nothing. Panic clawed at my throat as realization dawned. Despite everything I'd shown them, they still intended to proceed. Desperation bubbled over, spilling into action. Without thinking, I bolted past them, heading deeper into the tunnels. There had to be something, anything, that could sway them. Something undeniable. Something irrefutable. I raced through the labyrinthine tunnels, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. Behind me, shouts echoed as Mr. Hargrove and his team scrambled to follow. My mind raced faster than my feet. What could I show them that they couldn't ignore? Then it hit me, the water filtration system. If there was one thing developers craved, it was efficiency. And mine worked better than anything on the market. Skidding to a halt in the workshop, I gestured wildly at the humming machine. This, I exclaimed, breathless. It extracts clean water from soil moisture, even in drought conditions. Imagine the implications for agriculture or urban development. For the first time, doubt flickered across Mr. Hargrove's face. He stepped closer, inspecting the device with narrowed eyes. It's impressive, he admitted reluctantly, but then added, still doesn't justify halting construction. Frustration surged within me, but before I could argue further, another voice cut through the tension. One of the engineers who'd accompanied us spoke up, all evident in his tone. Sir, this isn't just impressive, it's revolutionary. The tech alone could save millions in resource costs. Others nodded in agreement, their skepticism melting into intrigue. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Mr. Hargrove sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. Fine, he said finally, his voice tinged with reluctant respect. We'll reassess our plans. But don't think this means you're off the hook entirely. Relief washed over me, though I knew the battle wasn't fully won. Still, as we ascended back into daylight, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the land, but for what it represented, resilience, creativity, and the unyielding power of dreams buried deep beneath the surface.